Hello, I'm Debbie Glenn, and I'm a software development application manager at Workday. And I was thrilled to have the opportunity to be on the committee for this year's Women Transforming Technology Conference. I'd like to welcome everyone today to the Emerging Leadership session. But before I introduce our speakers, I just want to remind you that we're taking questions via the Whova app. Just type them into the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. And also feel free to use the chat to network with one another. So with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to our first guest speaker, Catherine Ballantyne. Catherine is a Senior Director of Customer Success for VMware's Asia, Pacific, and Japan regions. She is a 30-year veteran in IT and has held senior leadership positions at companies such as Oracle, IBM, and Telium. Throughout her career, Catherine has carefully cultivated an engaging and integrated leadership style by recognizing the importance of being authentically present. And her passion for challenging herself extends well beyond her career. In 2019, she raced across Tanzania on a mountain bike and climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. She has even competed in 6 triathlon world championships, including Kona. Catherine is here today to share her finely tuned strategies for defining an authentic presence and her framework for enriching your storytelling. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Catherine. Catherine, take it away.
Thank you, Debbie. In the spirit of reconciliation, I begin by acknowledging I'm hosting this session from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Aurora Nation. They are the traditional custodians of the land on which I stand today, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I also acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in the session. Given the global nature of the conference, I respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all gather today. Welcome to this session on cultivating authentic presence through storytelling. Get your pens out or your Evernote ready. Expect to take home some actions from this session. We will start by exploring what authentic presence is and how to develop it through your use of storytelling. You can expect to leave the session with motivation for cultivating your authentic presence, 3 practical strategies for doing so, a framework to enrich your storytelling, and we'll end off with some inspiration on how you can contribute joy to our world recovery by leveraging your newly sharpened skills for the good of the community. For me, I became aware of the power of my authentic presence in my 20s when I was introduced to it through a course. 30 years on, I still remember the impact of that weekend vividly. It was a revelation to me that I could have most influence if I was simply present and myself. But even with this knowledge, in my early years, I orphaned parts of myself from the process, choosing to deliver the parts I knew were most recognizable to my audience, which meant core aspects of myself were left unseen. My orphan selves were simply left outside the room. Throughout my life, I've continued to explore the application of presence, and with it, have integrated my multifaceted self. One of the things I've learned along the way is that the more of myself I can bring to a presentation, the stage, or a room, the more powerful I become. People want to see themselves in a leader. So the more I bring my integrated self into the room, the more likely this is to happen. As I became responsible for teams, it's been about passing on these skills, but also building an environment where the team feels safe enough to bring their vulnerable and still integrating selves to the table. Telling stories that matter with the whole of yourself has power to shift perspectives and make a difference in the world. You have permission to be yourself. It doesn't need to be presented in a prescribed style to be meaningful, to be impactful. Much of what I talk about today is not original thought. What we're discussing should be attributed to 3 people who have greatly influenced my understanding and application of authentic presence and spinning a yarn. I am simply passing on what they generously taught me. Amanda Fleming first introduced me to valuing and cultivating authentic presence in my 20s. It was her course I first attended, and her insight forms the basis for all that I know today. Mike Anderson is the technical founder of the last organization I worked for, Telium. His ability to translate complex technical advances into easy to consume stories is quite amazing. And then finally, Simon Sinek, probably somebody who's far more recognizable to the group as a whole. It has had great influence. His work with Start With Why and The Infinite Game have highly influenced my philosophy since I first was introduced to his Golden Circle video 8 years ago. If you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend you go out and find it. It's easy enough to find. Each of us has fundamental influences in our history. They help form how we show up today. And remembering what they taught us can be highly valuable, especially in times of stress, like when you're trying to present to a big crowd. So, first action for today. Now, I have to say on these actions, I'm going to give you the action, but I'm not going to give you time to complete the process right now. I expect you to take them away and finish them off. So, first action, identify your own influencer triad. I've got 3. Most people do have about 3 that they identify. I urge you to contemplate who it is that you would call out that has had the most significant impact on your ability to present and bring stories to life. And have a think about why it is those 3 people you're calling out. The reason I want you to do this is it's really useful to hold on to that information, especially as a reference point when you're in, say you get steak wobbles and you're unsure of how to proceed. Quite often, one of those people will have the answer and they'll come to you when you need them most. So let's move on to presence. We know it when we see it. We definitely know it when we feel it, but it's one of those things that's really hard to describe. You'll often hear it described as charisma and confidence and being compelling, all of which are things that sometimes people think, how do I get that stuff? I don't know how to be it. Sometimes people with presence have those things, those characteristics, but not always. Presence is actually about the ability to connect with people and to have influence. For a leader to have impact, presence is essential. It is both a quality and a skill. And as such, it is something that can be developed and cultivated. It's not something you're born with. So if it's all about connection and there are lots of ways, then that means there are lots of ways we can have presence. You can be an introvert, an extrovert. A senior leader might like me, or perhaps you're an emerging leader. Or I know plenty of people who would say they're not a leader at all, but they still project a strong and powerful presence. You'll find I use the word leader throughout this presentation. And I would say that if you are cultivating authentic presence, whether you think you are or not, you will be a leader by default. Now, I need to say now that this is not about fake it till you make it. This is about knowing who you are and bringing that to the surface authentically. When the things you say and the things you do align with what you believe, you are congruent. And as humans, we have an innate sense of congruence or authenticity. I don't know about you, but I know I'm drawn to people who show that congruence or that authenticity, and I know it just innately. When you hold a position of alignment of belief with what you say and how you act, trust emerges. And trust is the ultimate lubricant in teams and across partnerships. You will find plenty of tools, tips, and tricks about how to model authenticity. But I believe you exhibit the most authenticity when you are actually in integrity with yourself. And there is no need for tips and tricks when you find that space. But let's face it, when we're under stress, like I was feeling 10 minutes ago, and you're struggling most to be present, when it's presenting to a group or going for a job interview or talking to someone you admire or dealing with somebody who's in a position of power. How do you find a way to be present in those most challenging situations? I want you to think about a situation where you were most challenged to be present. Did you approach it with dread? While you were in it, were you distracted? Were you worried about what people were thinking about you? What do I say next? What did I just say? Did you leave with a sense of regret, where you felt like you had been unseen? Where in fact, what you really wanted to have happen was that you approach it with composure, execute it with confidence, and leave with satisfaction. When you can do that, when you can be present, not only can you give a great presentation, but you're inviting others to be present with you. You can create and hold space for all. As you find your presence and with it your voice, you display integrated leadership. The more we can integrate and display our whole selves, the more we enable others to do the same. So I'm hoping with all of that preceding stuff, you've decided that presence is an important thing and you want to establish and you've established that it's something you want to cultivate. I would suggest that there are 3 areas to focus on. First, it's about state control. So first, I need to know what state I want to be in so that I can then influence that. Second, it's about connection. It's about being with the audience, being with the individuals in the audience. And the third, and probably the most important, is finding places to play. Places where you can play with presenting, where you can play with telling a story. So let's start with state. State is your way of being in the moment. Being in the moment is key to being present. If you're conscious of it, it's something that you can actually intentionally guide. To be in control of your state, you need to be clear on what that state is that you want to actually project. So you need to ask yourself some questions. What kind of leader do I want to be? How do I want to show up? And those 2 things are different. And then most importantly, how do I want my audience to feel? Once you have these, you then need to work out how to ensure that your actions align with your intention. So, second action for everybody. I want you to commit this to paper, right? So this is important. This is something that will grow over time, but what you define probably in the first run on this probably won't change much. I want you to start by thinking, what kind of leader do I want to be? Now, if I was to answer that question, I would probably use words like authentic. You will have guessed by now that that's a really important thing for me in the persona I project. Brave is another thing that I would like to project from leadership. Empathetic. And then I want you to think about, well, how do I want to show up? Now for me, so you will see, or you might see, I'm standing to do this presentation. So for me, how I want to show up is I want to bring energy to a presentation. I want to have movement. And that's why I stand when I present. And then finally, most importantly, how do you want your audience to feel? Now, for me, I would like to be able to form some form of connection where I can actually make the audience feel seen, that something that I say actually resonates and they think, oh, so I'm not the only person who feels like that. There is a place I belong. That, for me, is my goal when I'm presenting. I then use my physicality to bring action into alignment with intent. I'm from New Zealand, and there's a Māori proverb that many Kiwis, including myself, hold dear to our heart. He aha me nui o te ao. He tangata, he tangata. Ask me what is the most important thing in the world, and I will tell you. It is people, it is people, it is people. The same is true when you are presenting. It's about staying connected to your audience, to the people. For me, this is about looking out and seeing the people. Now, I know this is a little hard on Zoom, and trust me, I am very much looking forward to face-to-face presentations. I like to get a read on how people are responding. Are they leaning in? Are they leaning out? What can I hear? As I say, I acknowledge that in Zoom that those things are more difficult to create. For me, if I can turn the cameras on, I will. And when you get presenters who actually ask you, can you turn your cameras on? Quite often it is not about checking as to whether or not you're checking your email at the same time. It is about helping with being able to build that rapport. I think most people would actually guess that in this dual world that we've been living in, it's not unusual to be doing two tasks at once. Last, the place to play. Now, think of places to play in two ways, right? There's the obvious piece, which is look for places where you can practice presence and telling stories. Take it outside of your formal business context. That's a great way to actually find a playful place. Recently at work, they organized storytelling around a virtual campfire, and you can guess who the first person was to put their hand up. Made me nervous because that was presenting without a slide deck, and I also chose to present something that was quite personal to me. I also put my hand up for WT2 because it represented another place to play. What that means is if I have these events where I am just constantly testing out things, trying what might work, some of the presentations I use, I actually find that I recycle them through multiple iterations of delivery, and I take bits from one and recycle it into another. And what that means is when the big work presentation comes along, it's a little less daunting, and I have more content and more skills to actually apply. The second way to consider places to play is this should be, don't you know that's going to happen? I assume you can hear my dog. Places to play is ensuring that you are actually playing with what you are doing. This is not so serious that you can't have fun with it. And the more you have fun with it, the more your audience will actually enjoy it. So never lose the play from the presentation. Steve was renowned for being a great storyteller, but he wasn't actually always that way. His original pitch for the Lisa computer was a complete flop. Storytelling is actually a strategic business skill. I know it's not just a strategic business skill, but in this context, we'll call it that. It comes from practice, not from birth. Great stories build relationships and they make people care because our brains actually actively participate during storytelling. One of the biggest challenges, though, especially if you're new to stepping out into storytelling and especially with bigger events, is knowing where to start and the stories to tell. And the tip or trick here is, the truth of it is that most storytellers carry a virtual briefcase of some standard stories that they need to be able to call on at demand. First, they have a set of personal stories. Everybody should be able to, at will, be able to talk to your origin story, your why, the background of where you come from and how that influences today's motivation. Second, if that's where I came from, and in my vision story or my just cause, where am I headed and why? And then the joy story. We'll get back to that one a little later. Then there are the work-specific stories. You need to be able to talk to about at least one customer. We are in the world of customer first, customer driven, etc. You need to be able to also articulate a case for change, because change is always needed. We are always in transition. You need to be able to articulate what it is your business believes. And then lastly, but importantly, what is your professional motivation? And you could say that the professional motivation one is also a bit of personal, and it is. You could put it in either part. It doesn't really matter. I need to say, this isn't a definitive list. Your briefcases will flow to overflowing, but it's a great place to start. And if starting is what's stopping you from getting out and actually telling stories and presenting, then by building these out, you will find more confidence, and it will actually initiate the actual process of going out and delivering these things. So I'm going to talk about, how I build a why or origin story. If you've already got one of these, then great. You can apply the same frameworks that we have here to any of the stories in your briefcase. As I said, your origin story is where you came from and how that influences your motivation. It's foundational, and as a foundation, it doesn't change over your lifetime, although how you tell the story may well change as you get a different perspective on it. To get the best outcome on this process for defining your origin story, it is good if you can pair up with somebody who you trust, who's good at asking questions to help you. If you don't have someone like that, it's fine. You can still run the process on your own. But as with anything, if you can collaborate with somebody, often that opens insight that maybe on your own you wouldn't see. So I'd suggest you start by just simply looking at your past and finding all of the standout memories. Now, when you collect these memories, be specific about why they are standout. And what you're wanting to do is looking for reoccurring themes and patterns. What are the connections? How did one standout memory influence the next? You'll have way more content than you do. So then you'll be able to use in your why story. A why story, by the way, you want to keep it down to 2 or 3 minutes if you can. Probably have a short version and a long version, depending on the context. But you want to basically take all of those stories and pick out 3 or 4 of them that are the most significant, and use these to draw up that origin story or draft up that origin story. Now, once you've got the content, often I find people find that using some kind of framework can help you to craft it. Now, I've got 2 very simple ones here. You'll find plenty of storytelling frameworks on the internet, so I'm not even going to try in that space. The one suggestion I would say is it doesn't need to be complex, especially with delivering a story when you first start. Choosing a simple framework to give you structure to the story just helps. But we don't need to go on a hero's journey from start to end the first time we tell the story. There are 2 keys to delivering great stories: crafting the story, which we've kind of been through, and then playing with its delivery. So now that you have the content, you've got the structure, and you're getting comfortable, you need to get comfortable with delivering it when you are uncomfortable. And it's always good before you take your story out to get some feedback. So again, start with someone you trust. Deliver your origin story to somebody that you trust and get feedback from them. Second step is deliver it to yourself. Record it on video and give yourself feedback. I've got to say, this step is actually the step I find the toughest, not the 3rd step, which a lot of people will tell you is the toughest. Finding one, once you have it in such a state that you've had some feedback from somebody you trust, you've given yourself some feedback, find someone you respect. Find someone in a position of power to you, for example, but don't go to your manager. Go to your manager's manager and explain what you're doing and ask, can you have 15 minutes to get some feedback on this? The reason for doing that, for stepping up a level, is the higher you go, or the more you respect this individual, the more uncomfortable you're going to feel. And that is the whole point. It's supposed to feel uncomfortable. Because when you're presenting to a group of 500, for example, you can bet you're going to feel uncomfortable. So practice being uncomfortable in delivery is actually really helps. Once you've done all of that, you should be able to take your story to the world. Once you do, expect it to naturally evolve. So you can kind of get the theme. Action for you. I want you to make a commitment right now that you will take these steps to capture an origin story, or if you have an origin story, one of the other stories in your briefcase, that you will build that story this week and that you will deliver it 3 times before the end of the weekend. I'm choosing a very short time frame because we tend to lose these things. We come to presentations, we get all excited, and then we forget to do it. If you, as I say, if you already have an origin story, pick another one from the briefcase. Maya Angelou was a very wise woman. I've just spent 25 minutes talking about how to prep presentations, etc., etc. And what do people remember? They remember how you made them feel. So I got one last action for you. As storytellers, we have a remarkable privilege to use our skill to bring joy. This is a great exercise to add another story to your briefcase while playing. Craft one other story. This one, there is only one purpose: to bring joy. Use the same process that we've just been through, and then find somewhere special to deliver it. An example is you might form a story for children and then go tell it at the children's hospital. Or you might deliver a joy story at an aged care home. Find a different place to play and bring pure joy to the community. So with that, we started by exploring authentic presence. We're coming away with 4 actions. Identify the people who are in your history that have modeled presence and storytelling to you. Also identify why it is you selected them. For your presence challenge, next presence challenge, write down the state that you want to show up with, how you want your audience to feel, how you're going to get your actions to align with those intentions. Add one more story to your storytelling briefcase. If you don't have any, start by defining your why or origin story. And then the last task is find a place to play where you can use your skills to bring joy to the world. Thank you for listening. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Catherine, for such an inspiring speech. Hi, everyone. I'm Shreya Anand. I'm a senior cybersecurity engineer here at Workday. I will be hosting the Q&A session. So if you have any questions for Catherine, please drop them in. I do already see one question, so I'll get you started. Will this presentation be downloadable?
Fair enough question. I'm happy to supply it. So yes, I assume we can do that, can we?
I believe you can download all of them. It's going to be uploaded in a couple of days.
Okay. So I will make sure, I must admit, I made some changes this morning. I will make sure the final version of this is with the WT2 team, and you can upload it. Download it.
We're actually almost at the time mark now, so I will hand it over to Debbie.
Thank you very much, Shreya, and thank you, Catherine, for sharing your experience and the tools you've used successfully in your leadership style. And just judging by the excitement in the chat, it's clear that your presentation has really resonated with our attendees today. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I'm very